Hello, everyone, and happy to be here to present my paper for this very interesting conference. And I'm talk about design discourse emerged in the Eastern Mediterranean region. In this context, I'm talk about countries in the region, or major countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. These countries known for their support and pioneering position in emerging the modernity project in the region, influencing and shaping this discourse since it's emerged through 30s or 40s in last century. Studies about design discourse in the region is very limited. There is lots of publications in Arabic, but talk about design as an art, not as what design should be right now. And this traditional context affected a lot in design discourse in the region, design education, design professional practice, and the way people look and understanding design as adding value through ornamentation of the object. Following the hugely influence of the socio-political rhetoric in the region, the paper will be divided into 4 sections, if you like. These sections addressing periods moving the countries from colonized into national state into current chaos reflected through the situation in many societies in the country, in the region, sorry. With the colonization, after the long-term Ottoman Empire control on the region and the weakness and losing the First World War, British and French come to the region with lots of plans. So first thing they did it is divided the region through borders into states and start dividing these states between the 2 colonized powers. So Iraq, Jordan went to under the British colonization, and then later the mandate system, and Syria and Lebanon under the French. Looking to the social activity, we see craft-oriented societies in countries like Egypt, Syria, while Iraq and Jordan, with their position geographically around the desert, they are more semi-nomadic societies. And here I just try to explain our relation with objects from this point. So in Egypt, for example, crafts is embedded within the society from the history, and it's affected, and as a system, you see it's very expanded within the society, and the families transforming these skills through generations. Until now, all the craft people in Egypt, specifically, they still producing traditional designs. And this affected heavily on design education in Egypt. In fact, you don't find any institution, for example, with the title design in it, but all the institutions teaching design, they teach it as part of applied arts. And this is this phenomena only actually in Egypt, while the other countries, they have departments or school of design, but it is part of art-oriented institutions. Moving to the post-colonial era, which is from, for example, in Iraq from 22 until late of 50s, there is lots of influence from the colonial in the created state. At that time is the kingdom in Iraq, and This is very interesting quote saying that during 50s, Iraq seemed to have a hugely promising future, perhaps as a kind of Oriental Canada at that time. And this fact reflected on what's on the ground, if you like. So Baghdad started to be one of the capital in the work in international architecture and transforming the heritage, the old style cities into modern cities. And this was happening in Baghdad at that time. We see the Greek planning, for example, consultant Diaxo says he made the first master plan of Baghdad based on the modernity context completely and transformed it from being a heritage city into a very modern city and start building these mass production, if you like, houses at that time. And that was amazing things happen. People till now, they talk about it and how it's efficient, how it's very interesting places to live in it comparing with their previous houses. We see Le Corbusier build this stadium in Baghdad. Gropius built the University of Baghdad campus, and all these buildings exist, but actually it exists. It's a start or commissioned in 50s, but built in 60s and 70s later. Look to the cities at that time, transforming the city. This is Baghdad during 60s, and you can see the traditional building with the new style building. And this building actually is not by only international architects, but even from the local Iraqi architecture. Beirut during this era as well as very civic and modern oriented capital and culturally oriented capital in the region. Until now, it exists with this context. When the national states moved, design context transformed from this modernity-oriented into engage it with development strategies in the region or in these countries, affected by the social-oriented governments coming to the control in the region. Such example of international influences like Ahmed Abad Declaration in Design for Development, it utilized very well, specifically, for example, in Iraq, in the region. He is the only regional country signed this document. These socio-political regimes start to look how to create identity through design. And design start to be specifically in design communication and architecture, how we create our identity through it. Technology transformation, it started to be very effective, very energetic. Lots of factories opened in Egypt, produce cars, home appliances, and there is lots of work for designer to do in this process. Same thing in Syria, textile industry is very popular and it's very important industrial activity in Syria, and it was internationally recognized. Architecture in Iraq, we're gonna see lots of influence from the elements from Islamic architecture transformed to the contemporary architecture and applied in many projects actually in Iraq. It was even policies enforce architecture designer to work with this topic. This is one of the entrance to one of the big universities in Baghdad. Even the state start to be promoted itself through this elements, through monuments and museums and other public places where Islamic architecture start to be more modernized and utilized even with high technology production capabilities. After this era, it was the era of chaos. Most of the countries, for example, in Iraq, Syria, kind of the same in Egypt, but in less influence. And we see during this era that the control of the government start to be loosened in a way, and more new graduated designer from mainly from outside the region return back to the region and start to think in design in a different way. So in Lebanon, for example, this MENA Design Research Center, where they look to design from social context. It is not all about art and craft and making. We need to think in design as a tool to help our societies improving solving their problems. There is massive problem need to creative way of thinking to use it. And design can do this in much better way than anything else. And they start move of design week in the region, or kind of tradition to talk about design. And the first one happened in Beirut. Now, I think 3 or 4 years, it's very active. Repeated in another capital city, in Amman, even with the fact that in Amman, the more focus on professional design instead of applying design in the context of social activities, but it's just awareing of the importance of design in this process. In Egypt, we see more focus on communication design, and such example of many people working in this direction, and they continue improving their activities year after year. And my point, these activities start to engage and re-changing the culture of design in the region. And this is what I try to explain through my full paper. Thank you.